is Education and Climate Change, a multi-sector approach for the SDGs. My name is Khalid Al-Anzy, and I am honored to be with you, guiding today's event. To commence our event, please join me in welcoming our CEO, Fahad Al-Sulaiti, for his opening remarks.
For sure, I need to remove my mask. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good morning, Excellencies, honored guests. On behalf of Education Above All Foundation, allow me to welcome you to this panel on education and climate change, a multi-sector approach to the SDGs goals. A climate change impacting everything we do at Education Above All Foundation. The effects of climate change threat in life of our beneficiaries, our children, as well as their access to education. But we also know that quality education is the most important tools to the effort of tackle climate change. This is why it's critical to tackle these two challenges at the same time. The community we work with, marginalized children, youth, and women on the developing world, are the most vulnerable and increase vulnerability and the curiosity to the event caused by climate change. The multi-sector challenges they face as a result to the climate change include impact on food, security, sanitation, health, and economy. To tackle holistic approach of empowering young people and their community, we are working to make sure education is at center of climate plans, that the curriculums explicitly address the climate change and dangerous and strategic to make our communities sustainable and resilient. The multi-sector strategy of our work is to migrate climate change through education, and similar approach can deliver sustainable development more broadly. To that end, Education Above All Foundation inviting all of you to plan and to our Education Action Pledge, which will encourage us to act on the climate change. EAA is proud to kick off a pledge by committing to plant 1 tree for each student enrolled in our Salam school in Qatar for more than 3,400 students that we have. The pledge is aligned with Qatar commitment of plant 1 million trees before the FIFA World Cup 2022. Once again, thank you for our panelists and all the attendees. We're excited to be here today with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fahad. That was an exciting pledge from EAA's side. And now, I invite our first keynote speaker, His Excellency Badr Dafa. Ambassador Dafa is a special envoy of the Foreign Affairs Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability and the Executive Director of the Global Dryland Alliance, an international organization dedicated to food security in dryland countries. Prior to his leadership at GDA, Ambassador Dafa served as UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Assalamu alaikum. I was chatting with His Excellency, the Italian ambassador. Whatever speech you make, sometimes it does not include what you want, and even when you finish the speech, you think you have missed something. I'll try my best to give you a short and sweet speech. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Education Above All for extending this kind invitation to join this distinguished panel. As we all know, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement recognize the importance of quality education and awareness to build a wider circle of informed individuals able to make decisions that will be crucial for achieving sustainable future. Education, which is the fourth goal of the SDGs, together with awareness raising and public information, will enable community to sustain efforts across all areas of sustainable development over the years and decades to come. The integration of environment education into school curricula at very young age can be a game changer for future generations to develop social behavior and economic choices that respect the environment, social inclusion, and human rights. Climate education can open the door for countless research opportunities by young graduates to investigate the relation between climate change and socio-economic and even geopolitical issues that so far have been untapped. It also helped engaging youth in advocacy and demanding climate justice and putting pressure on policymakers and world leaders. In COP18, I remember that youth were given a platform to meet the higher authorities in Qatar and voice their demands. According to the Global Education Monitoring Report, access to education is more effective against climate change than investment in infrastructure. Projections show that if education progress stalled, future disaster-related fatalities would increase by 20% per decade. Communities most at risk from climate-related events are mainly in countries where education attainment is low and unequal. In addition, primary and secondary education provide farmers with basic skills needed for future and key information on sustainability challenges in agriculture. Policies on vocational training and skills development also bridge the gap between farmers and modern technologies. Sustainability and green growth require more investment in research and development. In order to provide the right knowledge and skills, higher education should include focused environmental programs. According to the estimates of the International Energy Agency, government need to increase energy of R&D by up to 5 times a year to achieve a rapid low-carbon transition. In Qatar, education and public awareness is at the heart of our National Climate Change Action Plan. Tremendous efforts have been made in research and development capacity building and education programs in the environment field. For example, Tarshid 22 continues to be one of the leading national awareness campaigns in many schools across Qatar, aiming to rationalize the use of water and electricity. Also, Qatar Foundation is focused on developing knowledge, skills, and behaviors needed to innovate and develop solutions toward more sustainable lifestyles. We all have great responsibility toward the future generation, and we can only achieve a greener and healthier planet by education, innovation, and cooperation. I wish this summit success and a fruitful outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You brought back a sweet memory of COP18. I was actually one of the youngest delegates there at that time, and it was a kickstart for me to engage with climate change topics. So thank you for continuing to lead and open and pave the path for youth on such important platforms. Moving on to that, to other people who pave the path for youth on important platforms, allow me to introduce our second keynote speaker, His Excellency Alessandro Prunas, Ambassador of Italy to Qatar. As co-host of COP26, Italy hosted the pre-COP26 conference in Milan, Italy in September this year, and His Excellency played a very positive and critical role in liaising Italy's ambition locally. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Thank you very much. I will take the challenge of Ambassador Dafa and try and be as exciting as I can. It's not easy in these formal situations, but I will try at least to give you some information that I hope will be useful. So first of all, let me thank Education Above All for inviting me to be part of to this very significant and timely initiative which explores the nexus between climate change, education, as well as the role of youth in fostering sustainability. Climate action has obviously been catalyzing media attention globally throughout the year. Italy has played a leading role in it, both as the G20 presidency and as partner of the UK in chairing COP26, as was mentioned earlier. Italy's attention to environmental issues throughout the year encompassed several initiatives and fora to address the topic from different angles, different standpoints. Let me sort of briefly outline them, and then I'll get to the point, I promise. The G20 Environment, Climate, Energy Ministerial in Naples back in May was the first ever G20 ministerial meeting of this kind. It was specifically devoted to the commitment of world largest economies to stop climate change through a balanced approach between economy and environmental protection. The G20 Leaders Summit then, which took place in Rome at the end of October, on the eve, by the way, of the opening of COP26, put climate action as one of the main topics on the agenda. The Italy-Africa Ministerial Conference held in Rome in October had a very specific focus on combating climate change and finding greener solutions to sustainable economic development. The pre-COP26, which took place in Milan at the end of September, brought together climate and energy ministers for the final formal opportunity to shape the negotiations in detail ahead of the summit that took place in Glasgow, as we all know. And last but not least, the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition Summit, which also took place in Milan at the end of September, more or less at the same time of the pre-COP26, provided young delegates an unprecedented opportunity to put forward ideas and concrete proposals on the climate agenda. It is specifically on the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition Summit that I would like to focus for a while, because I believe it is important for today's topic. With this summit, we were very proud to host 400 young people from 186 countries. Italy wanted to involve the future generation as one of the main stakeholders of the decision-making process. Future generations are indeed very interested in the topic of sustainability and climate action, and they demonstrate their deep involvement by coming together in Milan from all over the world to voice their concerns for the future of our planet. We wanted their voice to be heard by world leaders. This is why the conference focused on the development of a manifesto, which was then presented to the Italian presidency during a discussion between youth delegates and ministers attending the pre-COP26. The response we had in terms of participation and interest was absolutely outstanding. I'm happy to say that Qatar also took part to this event with enthusiasm, with two young delegates, Fatima Abu Khalika and Nishat Shafi, making their contribution to the agenda. Milan also hosted a delegation from Qatar Foundation and Education Above All, our host today, which had the opportunity to establish contacts with Italian institutional, private and academic stakeholders that I'm sure will bring to many joint activities in the field of education, sustainability and climate action. Italy took note of the fruitful discussions held in Milan and as presidency of the G20 facilitated at the Rome summit the approval of an ambitious agenda on climate action. Some say it's not enough, we say it is a starting point. The G20, the 20 countries responsible for about 75–80% of global CO2 emissions recognize the need to achieve climate neutrality with zero net emissions by or around the middle of the century in order to contain the increase of temperatures within the 1.5 degrees Celsius. For the first time, there was an acknowledgement on the need to reduce the use of coal for energy production. Moreover, Italy facilitated the finalization of the Paris Rulebook, which contains a set of rules making the Paris Agreement fully operational and allowing for transparency in monitoring the implementation of the climate objectives of participant states, the so-called NDCs. Progress was also made on climate finance issues. It was also decided to double the funding for the adaptation of developing countries to the impact of climate change. Italy also announced at the G20 summit a new commitment of $1.4 billion over the next 5 years, for a total of $7 billion. What I just described are just some of the most relevant achievements of the G20 summit. We strongly believe that some of these results would not have been possible without the contribution of youth in the pre-COP events. Because we believe that one of the legacies of the Italian co-presidency in COP26 is specifically the involvement of youth in climate issues, we hope that the Youth for Climate event that took place in Milan will become an established permanent appointment on the international climate agenda. We believe so much in the positive contribution that youth can bring to the climate agenda that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working in collaboration with the International Renewable Energy Agency on the development of an educational program for young leaders. Young people are the future of humanity, and they are the ones that will ultimately pay the price for the current damage to the environment. They will also be the stakeholders of the future. Therefore, it is very important to provide them with an education focused on the protection of biodiversity and environment. At the same time, young people are already very aware of these dangers, even more than older generations such as mine are. Therefore, we shouldn't believe that we can only teach to the youth because there is a lot to learn from them and from their ambition to change the world. And I believe this is probably the most important lesson that we learned from this year's activity. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for another set of inspiring remarks on the importance of youth integration in not just only the climate change topics, but all topics around the world, especially relating to their futures and how they can be a part of that change and manifest it. To kick us off, we have now our panel slowly transitioning into the idea of youth. I'm honored to present our first speaker who flew in all the way from Jordan. Her name is Engineer Reem AlHaddadin. She's a sustainable development researcher at WANA Institute. She researches on topics that include, but are not limited to, hydrodiplomacy, green economy, climate change adaptation and mitigation, renewable energy, migration, and conflict. Reem, please join me on the panel. Our second youth speaker is Hessa Al Noaimi, Quality Assurance Director at Newton Group of Schools and representative of Arab Youth Climate Movement, Qatar, a registered and independent organization led by a group of young professionals in Qatar. Please join us on the panel. We also have Roula Hamati, who is a migration management officer for the IOM mission in Qatar. Previously, she was the coordinator of the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, a regional network of civil society organizations in the Arab and Mediterranean region working on issues of migrants, refugees, and children on the move. Please join us on the panel. I'm also thrilled to announce that we have two speakers who are joining us virtually that could not be here today. We are fortunate that this is a hybrid conference, and I would like to introduce them now. We have Giuilia Braga, Program Manager of the World Bank Group's Connect for Climate Global Partnership Program and Communications Officer in the Engagement and Partnerships Unit. A communication expert passionate about the role of storytelling and visual media in creating a better world, Giuilia has international experience in global advocacy campaigns, youth engagement, and private-public sector partnerships. Giuilia, nice to see you on the screen. Also with us today is Nasreen Al-Saim, who is an environmental and climate activist. Started activism in 2012. She currently serves as chair to the UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, along with 6 other young climate activists. Nasreen, nice to see you on the screen. Good morning, ladies. It was not coordinated that this is a panel of women, I promise. It just happened to be that way, I promise. We are fortunate, though, to have these exceptional women in their field. So, Roula, starting with you, to kick us off.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Dana. It's such a pleasure and such an honor to be with you today at this very important topic. And thank you for Education Above All for always organizing these cutting-edge discussions, forward-looking discussions. And it's such a pleasure to be here, both personally and on behalf of the IOM. Having said that, thank you for the introduction. Let me start by saying what I am not. What I am not is actually a climate specialist. Our climate specialist was supposed to be with us today, but due to the recent COVID restrictions, she was unable to attend. However, I have worked very hard with her to prepare this presentation, so I really hope to bring to you a lot of the work that IOM has been doing on the nexus between migration and climate change. So let me start by saying first that IOM was actually the first UN agency to bring the issue of climate change into its working structure. So in 2015, based on the request of member states, IOM actually integrated climate change in its working in Geneva at headquarters level. And after that, IOM has appointed 5 thematic specialists covering the different regions of the world to start to look at the issue of climate change within the lens of how it impacts migration and how are we all affected and how people are affected as a result of climate change. So starting from 2015, we've had a stronger focus on climate change, environmental degradation, and natural disasters, and how they impact mobility. Now, having said that, let me just give a brief overview and background on the interlinkages between these 2 topics, because this is very important. So we know that over the past few decades, we have gained a lot of understanding on the nexus between climate change and migration, and how climate change actually drives mobility, and why do people move, and the reasons why people actually move. So we know for a fact that people are moving because of climate change. This is established, this we know very well. But we know that looking to the future as well, people will continue to move, and even more so. These are the projections that this is an issue that's going to gain a lot of more attention, and this is the reality. People will move because of climate change. So over the last few decades, we've had a lot of notable changes in terms of policy processes that are looking at the 2 issues together. And first was, of course, the 2030 agenda, which came after the MDGs. And for the first time, we've had the focus on 2 issues, basically climate change and migration. And this was not something that was happening at the UN level before that. After that, we've had, of course, the Paris Agreement that we've heard a lot about. And then again, the nexus between the 2 was mentioned. Finally, something very close to IOM's heart is the Global Compact for Migration, which really looked at the drivers for migration and climate change as one of the main drivers for climate migration. And as a result of all of this, in IOM internally, we're looking at this more closely. This is an issue that we're both looking at the policy level, at the institutional level, and at the practical level. We're looking at how can we be actors to minimize the drivers, but also to work very closely on the issue. And so in 2021, we've developed our institutional strategy looking at climate change and migration. And if you allow me, Dana, let me just mention a few.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
An example or two of what you mean when you talk about migration that is induced by climate change.
Yes, so the way we're looking at migration and climate change is by looking at three main strategic objectives. One is supporting people to move, and this is in terms of migration management that cuts across a wide range of issues. So border controls, labor migration, drivers, etc. And then the second focus is really looking at people on the move. So in terms of protection, so the rights of migrants during the migration journey. And our last focus is really on resilience. So making sure people are actually able to stay. Because this is very important when we're talking about drivers of migration in general, building resilience of communities through green jobs, green initiatives, etc., and making sure that people are actually able to stay. So in terms of concrete initiatives, because I know you're very interested in that, Dana, let me just mention a few examples of how IOM has been working in Africa, if I still have the time.
Go for it.
Yeah, so we are working holistically, and our engagement in Africa is really focused on a number of objectives. One is to contribute to building more inclusive and sustainable policies. Two is to focus on community and nature-based solutions in sectors such as agroecology, agroforestry, coastal resilience in Senegal, restoring degrading farmlands in Ethiopia and Niger, and plastic recycling in Kenya or solar power at regional level. Now in Ethiopia, what IOM has done has been to rehabilitate degraded farmlands in communities with a higher number of returnees. We've worked on restoring the farmland through training in agroforestry techniques and preventing future damage by creating channels to divert the runoff water into basins for storage and for irrigation during the dry month. We've worked with a local NGO there to provide training which covered broader topics related to environmental degradation, farming techniques to prevent it. In Kenya, we are working in a very different context, an informal settlement on the periphery of Nairobi. And there we have 200,000 inhabitants where they are facing a lot of challenges. And so one of the issues is that there's a lot of pollution, particularly with plastic. And another challenge during COVID was that youth are really struggling to find employment. So what we've done was to work with another UN agency to give technical training to develop a plastic recycling enterprise at the Mahara Youth Center. So we've worked at the, finding jobs, but also at the technical training level.
That's so inspiring and enlightening. Thank you so much, Roula. And I know you have a lot more coming where that came from, but we'll circle around. And I think it's enlightening when you really think about the implications of climate change on the inhabitants of that specific community. Like you said, with regards to water security, we were talking about that earlier, before the panel. How do communities move to access resources, and how that when the resources are affected, so are the communities? It's so enlightening to think about it beyond just the globe, but it has, also specific examples of people that are affected and need the support of agencies such as the IOM. I would like to engage here with us, Reem, on this topic as well. We were discussing this morning too. Reem, I just want to ask you, building on a little bit with what Roula was speaking about, through your work at the WANA Institute as a researcher in development, how can green policies be advocated for and we ensure they are being implemented by governments and private sector?
Thank you, Dana, for the previous introduction and this opportunity. It's quite exceptional. This is my first time in Qatar.
Welcome.
So far, so good, I think. Before answering this question, I will take you all a step back. Recently, I came across a study conducted by Ipsos 2020 on consumer sentiment index in different countries. Some of these countries are Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon in specific. What do you think consumers that were interviewed in these countries have in common? Of course, they are all part of the MENA region. But you might think these countries have different demographic, social, economic status. But interesting enough, they all share a mutual top concern, which is unemployment. and their least of their concerns is environmental challenges, in specific natural resources scarcity. This actually worries me to see that people still consider environmental challenges or threats as something intangible and not being, rather than being part and parcel of current development challenges such as unemployment. We have to understand that people in middle and low income countries are at a crossroad of facing development challenges and increased unemployment, and on top of all of this, the averting looming challenges of climate change. And now going into green policies, you can't actually parachute it from above. Therefore, our knowledge has to be amended, updated, data has to be robust, and it is essential. The basic or the building block in the process of change and development is coordination and cooperation. To find the language of dialogue between the different stakeholders, local communities, we have the ministries, municipalities, youth groups, women, all of the people included. Then you can have alignment. We can have alignment between policy, green growth projects, investments, green policies that actually work for the national development goals.
So, Reem, you're undoubtedly saying a multi-sector approach.
Of course. And even the already existing strategies, they can be amended with a green thinking or a green growth approach.
And with that, with green thinking, with community development, to support them to think with a green mindset, I hear you say education.
This is where I'm gonna now go to your question. Then how do you readdress our priorities by valuing the ecosystem, what the ecosystem services has to give us from natural resources and so on. Green policies can only place only if the people want it or the people can support it. I think this is where education plays the key role in building or in shifting behaviors and preparing generations to be aware. And also, when I usually call it environmental ownership. Ownership of their environment, their land, their natural resources. I think good access to education is quite good in many of our regions, but it should be made on enhancing learning outcomes on topics including environmental dimension, such as we also worked with environmental or climate change ambassadors. Programs where youth come from different backgrounds, they don't have to be technical people or people that understand climate change. That come from different education streams are all learning to advocate for their environmental local challenge and how they can adapt, mitigate to this environmental challenge itself.
That you just presented a very complex but very powerful strategy.
Sorry about that.
No, but you should be leading on these topics. That was amazing. I just want to transition with all of that and take it to Hessa, who I know has taken this research that think tanks like the One Institute do and implemented it on the ground through your grassroots approach with the movement. So my question to you, Hessa, is, in your opinion, we know that education plays a paramount role in raising awareness and promoting behavioral change when it comes to climate change mitigation. What can you tell us about your experience in this area, specifically working with schools through your movement?
Thank you, Donna, for hosting me here today. Firstly, it's so nice to be back with Education Above All. I've been a youth advocate with the organization since 2012, so it's really lovely to be amongst old friends. And I'm here today to represent the Arab Youth Climate Movement Organization. We are an independent organization, and just as was mentioned before, I'm not a climate specialist either. I'm not an expert. I specialize in politics, and I went into education. And what we, as a group of young professionals working in Qatar, realized that all of us have this passion in protecting our environment and in coming up with localized, regional, contextualized solutions to the topic of climate change. we have all been exposed to different strategies and different policies that are regarding environmental protection, environmental awareness, that we found to be inspiring, but sometimes not really relevant to our context. And so we thought, how do we begin to fix this? It's a big question. And because we were all from very different industries, we found different solutions. And so in 2019, we started working on our household carbon footprint project. We were lucky enough to launch it a month and a half ago, and we had His Excellency Dafa speak as well in that launch. And really, this is a testament to how we were managed to find different stakeholders within the community to collaborate and to come up with a multi-sector solution to the topic of climate education. What the Household Carbon Footprint Project it focuses on is teaching students how to extract information and how to use that information to inform action. This is a very powerful thing. And I say this as someone who has 6 years experience in a range of schools in Qatar now. Children feel more secure, more inspired, more positive about their future when they have data and they have the knowledge to use that data to inform action and inform change. Now, a meta-study in America recently found out that when students learn about climate education, even if only for a month or two, end up, after completing a similar survey at the end of the 2 months study, end up feeling more positive about climate change. Not positive in the sense that it's not threatening anymore or an existential crisis, but more positive in the sense that they feel like they could actually do something about it. And really, as the younger generation, this is what we should be empowering. As schools, as a community, as a nation, these are the active participants that we should be empowering with those skill sets. And so the Household Carbon Footprint Project brings in several members of the community. We bring in families as the household, we bring in students as the participants of the study, and we bring in communities and organizations such as Education Above All, such as the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, etc. What the student does, the student is trained by teachers across schools and public and private schools in Qatar, how to measure their own carbon footprint in their house. So that requires them measuring their waste consumption, measuring their electricity and water consumption, looking at transport, looking at fuel consumption, looking at how many times they've traveled in a year. Did they go business class or economy class? Because business class is 3 times the carbon footprint of economy, for example. All these tiny things that they would not have considered or thought had an impact on their environment, suddenly they realize it does actually. These tiny choices do add up to the larger impact that we're studying about. So when a student goes through that process, learns how to extract data, what we do as an organization, as AYCM, is we teach them how to use that data to find out what factors are the most impactful. And after realizing what factors contribute the most to their carbon footprint, now comes the bigger, more important question is how are we going to change it? How are we going to fix it? Here we bring in the families, we bring in these students, and we bring in these schools, and we say, what kind of projects, what kind of initiatives do you want us to work with you on in order to ensure that this data can be used for good? And how can we make this sustainable? So AYCM, the reason why we are so honored to be on a panel like this today is because we really are a bunch of volunteers that have a passion for climate education and want to have a big impact, and realized pretty soon that the only way for us to do that is if we have the platforms and the will from different sectors to collaborate with us. And today really is a testament to the kind of conversations we need to have, especially in the Arab world, where we are the youngest region in the entire world. We have major issues that such as unemployment, such as political unsettling, climate crises that are really affecting our livelihood every single day. In the next 10 years, the Earth's temperature will increase by 1.2%, and that will have catastrophic implications on the most underserved communities. And so us as citizens of the world, but citizens of our respective nations, what we need to do is ensure that these children that we're raising are not crippled by that fear, but rather feel empowered to make a change, because we've seen it. We've seen it happen. All of us on this panel have seen it happen. And so this is what we hope to do as AYCM.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing initiative, Hessa, and I love the idea of focusing on empowerment versus fear, crippling, empowerment through data, empowerment through youth engagement, and above all, empowerment through education, which seems to be definitely, without any doubt, a theme on this panel and with our speakers today. Thank you so much, Hessa. With that, I move to our online speakers, and I direct my question to Giulia, who has done phenomenal work. Giulia, I know you're joining us from Italy. Buongiorno.
I am indeed. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can
Good
hear
morning,
you.
Dana.
I'm not sure we can see you for the time being.
You cannot?
No, there might be something. Maybe turn off the camera and turn it back on. That would be helpful. Okay, we can see you now. Awesome, we can see you. Yes. So my question to you, Giulia, and just building on what we've been talking about so far from our three inspirational panelists, is we have seen the power of youth partaking in the pre-COP26 that took place in Milan. This is something His Excellency touched on very much. In fact, you know, EAA was part of that, and we supported our youth advocates to partake in the conversation. What initiatives have you worked on through the C4C that highlight the positive contributions of the youth, and what can different sectors do to support this effort?
Thank you very much, Dana. And it's really a pleasure to be with you, even if sadly not in person. But I'd like to thank you and Education Above All for inviting us. I'm honored to be here representing Connect for Climate, which, as you said, is a World Bank Group program that started working to advance climate solutions and engage with youth over 10 years ago, way before climate was such a major topic in the international and institutional fora. Actually, we started with a photography competition for African youth in the lead up to COP17 that was taking place in Durban. And we were amazed to receive entries from every country on the African continent. This eagerness of these young people to participate and the strength of their images and stories convinced us that tackling climate change was not only urgent and essential, but that this was an issue that global youth cared so much with their whole heart. And I've been with Connect for Climate ever since, and I'm very proud of that. As you said, it is clear that over the last decade, the youth climate movement has become the face of global climate action. And this year, for the first time in the history of UN climate negotiations, the pre-COP meetings in Italy opened with an intergenerational roundtable between ministers and young climate leaders. It was really beyond inspiring to be there, and I'm sure Nisreen will talk more about that since she was there with us. Youth delegates from around the world presented their demands, very tangible, concrete, and strong asks and ambitions that they worked on during the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition Summit, and decision makers listened. Together, all the youth delegates drafted the Youth for Climate Manifesto, which is a powerful blueprint for climate action that calls on governments, institutions, and civil society to take urgent action rooted in climate justice, not really just in broad terms, but with very specific recommendations. We know that important steps have been made in Glasgow and that we need more. And I'm sure we all share the sentiment that it is now our obligation to really implement the commitments made and to continue pushing for the ambition that the next generation is asking for and is deserving. If there is one thing that I have learned from all these amazing young people over the years, it is that they are tired of just being called inspirational. The youth we work with are not just climate activists, they are engineers, economists, community organizers, poets, scientists, filmmakers, artists, in many cases students at university or high school. They are on the forefront of climate action and they're leading the way forward. We need to remember that even if the youth climate movement is strong, it still needs our full support. We should remember that many young people are not yet engaged in this conversation, either because their attention is elsewhere, which is understandable, and my generation didn't have to grow up trying to save our species, or most importantly, because they can't afford the luxury, because they're dealing with other issues. And I believe that this is where education plays a key role. We need to work together and make it easier for more and more young people to learn about climate change and climate solutions, and to help them be part of the transformation to a climate resilient future. And I think it is important to do that by integrating climate education in school curricula, but also by exploring new creative climate education models. Connect for Climate is very committed to work with partners in true partnership, as SDG 17 reminds us, to continue elevating youth stories and demands, particularly through our work with the creative industries and the arts, as they link to informal ways of supporting climate education. From film to music to sport and fashion, we are supporting and encouraging solutions implemented by youth, and we are eager to continue growing this network. So we encourage companies, institutions, creatives, youth and decision makers at the national and local levels to really commit, support, and partner with us. Thank you.
Giulia, thank you so much for that. I think what I hear you say, and it's very powerful before we move on to Nasreen, is the importance of an interdisciplinary approach, but also no longer tokenizing the youth who are on these platforms, no longer seeing them as just figures of inspiration, but rather a force of nature themselves, people who are making the change that we want to see. And that is very inspirational. And this is a perfect segue to one of those forces of nature with us, who is Nasreen, joining us online. Nasreen, we are very honored to have you as the chair of the UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Assalamu alaikum. And I have a very powerful question for you. It is about inspiration. I know we just talked about that, but I think you have such a rich and diverse stories to share with us. So as a young climate leader, what impact are you most proud of? And beyond that, what advice would you give other youth activists who are joining us globally through the live stream, but are also just starting out in this space?
عليكم السلام دانا صباح الخير عليكم جميعا. I'm very glad first of all to be here with you today, although not physical as Giulia mentioned. But first of all, before answering your question, I just want to say that education is a key issue, because if you don't really understand the problem, it's very hard to get a solution for the problem. And we are not only talking about formal education, schooling, universities, high schools, and so on, but we are also speaking about the informal education, the workshops, the trainings, how to reach people in the street, the awareness raising processes that all of the youth advocates are trying to get. I also started quite early in 2012. Also, climate change was not a big thing at that time. So I can really see how much development the climate movement had. I used to be the only female in the group coming from the MENA region, for example, but and then a few people joined. We had Safa Al-Jiyusi, we had very horrible, let me say, warriors on climate change coming on, especially females. And now seeing the numbers of young females participating in COPs, in this COP, although it was very hard accessing COP in Glasgow, it's really make my heart feel like we are growing very big, and we are actually achieving one of the goals, which is making climate change is the issue of everyone. So my message to all of the young people and everyone who really wants to make climate actions is to start with yourself. Educate yourself very well, because if you understand the problem and you understand the perspective of the problem and dimensions that this problem as climate change concerns, you will be able to actually find very glorious solutions for that. And I trust very much the inspiration, not only the inspiration, but the innovation that comes from young people, because we have seen it in every sector, not only climate change. We managed to find a very magnificent way of finding how to go about things and how to solve it. And I think we have a say in Arabic, which is al-haja wal-ikhtira'. So I think all of us, when we have a huge need, a huge um, investments and investors and comes along. And also one of the things that inspired me is I had the honor to be actually one of the co-chairs of one of the thematic areas in Youth for Climate, which is Youth Driving Ambition, which is group work number 1. And the amount of passion that young people had in the group was amazing, although most of them were actually under 18. And we also had one of participants who she was only 17, but she had very articulated answers to many of the questions and many of the things that us, the older people, think it's hard to get. So I have full trust on you. You just need to work on yourselves, because investing in yourself and in your abilities is very important.
Nisreen, what inspired you to act? And I believe it was in your environment in Sudan. What was that one thing that said, oh my goodness, I need to act now on climate change? It's happening, it's real, it's here, and I need to be global, and I need to, the passion that has driven you as far as you have gone as chair, mashallah, of the advisor group to the Secretary General. What was your spark?
Well, it's not as aspiring as you think. I did physics in my bachelor degree, so I'm a woman of science, but I always had a deep passion of political science. I think it started in 2003, when everything was happening with Iraq and US, and then I was hearing big words. I was only in the 2nd grade of the primary school, but I was listening to Kofi Annan, because he was the Secretary General at that time, and then the Security Council, nuclear weapons. I mean, it was a very big words for me, but I always had the question of why a far country like US, for example, and something called the UN have an interest in a country like Iraq, which is in our region. So as growing up, I had, of course, a lot of answers to these questions, but I decided to do physics in my undergrad. So I was thinking how to link both topics together. And then in my first year of the university, we had political problems in Sudan. So the university closed for 3 months, and I had 3 months of research to do on how to link both. So I discovered something called science diplomacy. And the biggest 2 topics in science diplomacy was water and climate change. And because there's a lot of science in both, but also there's a lot of diplomacy. And then I could link it to what's happening in my country and how people in Sudan are suffering. And then I started working in climate change, peace and security, because climate change is a cause for a lot of conflicts in Sudan, conflicts over natural resources, conflicts from migration. And then I also worked in climate change and migration. So everything developed very fast and very big, because there is a need for people to work in all of the fields, actually. And this is a call for everyone to take an action.
Nisreen, thank you so much. Actually, that was very inspiring. I don't know what you were talking about when you said it wasn't. A woman of science diplomacy, and the chair of the UN Secretary General Group on climate change and climate action. Mashallah alayki, you have done a lot. And I saw the women in the panel here in person with us nodding in agreement with what you were saying. I think having you really encompassed Reem's outlook on the science and the research behind climate change, Roula's outlook on the migration and the effect of climate change on communities and how it makes them act and changes their behavior, but also both the thoughts we have from Hessa and Giuilia on the importance of education and youth engagement on a policy level to implement these green policies and represent the youth. Panelists, I thank you so much for a very inspiring panel, and I hope that we can all connect beyond this session. I would like to now invite I would like to first thank you and give you a round of applause along with our and let it be a call to action, like Nisreen said. Let us all connect beyond this, and I'm happy to lead on that, inshallah. And for the time being, I would like to welcome you off stage and invite on stage with us our Executive Director, Leonardo Pinheiro, for the closing remarks. Thank you, Leonardo.
Thank you, Dana. At the outset, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and panelists. We had a very inspiring discussion today with different perspectives from all sectors. And a special congratulations to Dana for organizing and moderating this amazing session. A round of applause for her. We heard today from our speakers how education is essential in the urgent fight against climate change. Unlocking knowledge about climate change will help young people to understand and tackle the consequences of global warming, encouraging them to change their behavior and help them to adapt to what is already a global emergency. The SDGs, for example, is one of the various initiatives that have been launched to try to curb climate change, and it's evident how the issue is interconnected between the different goals, which is also a driver for our organization, Education Above All, to engage with the multi-sector approach. Educating people, especially children, and raising their awareness regarding the causes and consequences of climate change is a must and should become a compulsory subject in the curriculum. So far, only Italy have done this, and other countries, we should follow this example. From our side, as Education Above All, and as announced by our CEO today, EAA is proud to present a new initiative that will collect pledges from different actors with the purpose of stimulating climate action and educating our community. The work is inspired by the many examples we heard here today, and as we are coming to the end of the session, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I hope each of you will join us in making a pledge for education and climate action. Thank you very much.